been pretty long since I built some mobile application on my YouTube channel. So I came up with something that is very interesting for you guys, mobile first series. So in this mobile first series, we're going to build a bunch of mobile responsive applications that is going to expose you to how to use CSS and also HTML to build responsive application, or we can even use ReactJs or Vue.js on the long run. So this is the first application we're going to be working on, and it's a timer application, which is going to allow us to set a time. So when I set a time in this input box and click on start, it's going to take that time and count down to that time smoothly. I can also stop that time and restart. And it's also something we are going to put into consideration how much times we have used. So it's going to keep track of all the times we have used right here. And also it's going to prioritize those times based on the ones we use the most. So you can see the number is kind of randomized here, but that's not like a random sort. That's like a sort based on the ones we have used the most. So guys, it's a tutorial we are gonna enjoy, so don't mind my voice. It's a tutorial we are gonna enjoy, so let's get started and see how it goes. So guys, I used to be called Boats before, but right now I changed my YouTube name to Telecodes, and it's something I intentionally did. So don't mind the boat you're seeing here. That's still me. Of course, I'm still arranging everything. It's just that I've been very busy these days. That's why. I'm going to switch over to desktop, and I'm going to go over to my YouTube folder. So inside this YouTube folder, I'm going to create a React application because this is going to be a React app. So create React app. I'm going to call it a timer app. Too bad and too early for me to make mistakes, but let's just go ahead and correct that. This is create React app. So let's allow that to finish. So that actually took some time to complete. I'm going to switch into that timer folder, and I'm going to open that project folder on my code editor. I'm actually using Visual Studio Code. You can just go ahead and use your own preferable IDE. So inside my IDE, I just want to quickly increase the font size. So I'm just going to change this to, I think 24 is always good for a clearer video so that you can see the code perfectly. So let me just go ahead and give that a try. So yeah, this looks very nice. So inside this app.js folder, I'm going to clear everything that we don't need. So I don't need all these these HTML elements. I don't need them. And also I'm going to delete all the unnecessary files that I don't need. So this is just going to leave us with these little HTML elements. So I'm just going to change this class to container for now. And save that. And inside the index.js file, I remove the web vitality something app file, So that's just it. So we just probably have the app.js, and also I'm going to add one more file called the style.css, and I'm going to import that style.css right here. So you can just go ahead and import React, but I think with the latest version of React, you don't actually need to do this. But let me just go ahead and import that. And I'm going to import this the file name directly, not the. So this is style.css. So I'm just going to save. And I think, guys, I forgot to actually show you guys something. So the thing I forgot to show you guys was that this is very responsive on any device. So even if I switch to mobile screen, so you can see on mobile screens it's kind of very responsive. If I change it, it's very responsive, and also it's very responsive on like iPads and tabs. So I needed to show you that before I go ahead and start the application. So I'm just going to run npm start, and we're going to allow the ReactJs to actually create our application. So right now our application is started. Of course, we have nothing on the display because right here I have nothing here. So if I just go ahead and put in like heading 1 and just type in timer right there and save. So when we refresh and come back here and refresh, it's going to show that timer. It kind of actually took some seconds to finish compiling that. So you can see that text timer right there. Inside this source folder, I'm going to create a folder called components. And inside these components, we're going to create all the necessary components that we're going to need. So we're going to have the actions component. We are going to have the onboarding. So the onboarding is the first screen by the left we saw earlier. We're also gonna have another screen called progress. So this is where we're gonna be putting in the progress bar, and we are gonna have one more, let's say, higher order component called timer. So this higher order component is gonna be like the parent component for all the components. So this is like using a shortcut called ROFCE. So I like using ROFCE. So ROFCE kind of brings down a functional components, and let me just go ahead and quickly do it for other ones. And if you don't have that on your IDE, just come over to the extension tab right here, and I think you have to search for React Redux. There is an extension I use here. Yeah, so you can just go ahead and install the EF7 React Redux snippet. So this is exactly what I'm using right there. So I'll just go ahead and close that. So let me just close all the components, and then let's focus on the ones that we need now. So inside right here, I'm going to import the timer from component/timer. Also, I'm going to import the onboarding. So let me just import that quickly. So we have the onboarding component from components/onboarding. So I'm going to clear that heading 1, and then we can just add those components. So we have the onboarding. So don't mind my PC is kind of lagging. And then we can also add the timer components. So if I go ahead and save and allow that to finish compiling, and let's check back in our browser, we kind of get the onboarding and also the timer components. Inside the onboarding component, let me just quickly go ahead and go into that file. So the way I went into that file was just to hold my control key and then press on that name of the file. It's going to bring me directly into that file. I'm just going to put in the necessary elements that we need here, the necessary HTML elements. So React doesn't just use class, it uses something called class name. So for this one, it's called onboarding, and right here, I'm going to put in that heading 1 we deleted called timer. So I actually wanted us to see what we are working on by the right. So that's why I kind of reduced the sizes of this code editor and also the size of the browser so that we can see what we are working on by the right. So we are done with the onboarding screen, and the next thing we can start off with right now is the styling. Let me just open my styles.css folder file, So before we proceed on the styling, I want to show you something we can actually do, because we're going to be using a custom font size. So I just want this to be dragged out. I'm going to search for Google Fonts. So I think I've started using Brave browser. It's kind of a very nice browser, and it kind of gives me a cool experience, and I love that. So let's go over to Google Fonts. I'm going to grab one font called Rubik. So you can actually make use of millions of fonts on Google Fonts. It depends on your choice. So I'm just going to select the one we want. And right here, I'm going to select all these styles. So let me dismiss this, add this one, add this. So let me just quickly add that, this. So you can actually not add all these. It depends on you, but I just want to show you how to use Google Fonts, because we're also going to do something like CSS, and CSS styling is very nice for this our application. So let me just go ahead and close that, and then come right here and paste it. So we are now using a custom font called Rubik. So whenever we are trying to style with CSS, there are some things that CSS now has, CSS3, which is kind of very, very nice. We can actually define CSS variables. So with the root objects here, inside here, we can specify a default color. So I'm just going to call this a default color of ED1C24, so that we don't actually get to reuse this hex code over and over again. So we just make reference to this default color. So we also have the white color, which is just triple F, or you can actually make it 6. Then we also have the silver. I don't think this is silver, but kind of looks like a silver color. So whatever name you use here, you can get to reuse that color whenever you make reference to this name. So I want to get rid of all the margin, on set, or we can also use the padding and I'll set every margin, every default margin on each element. So inside this body, so inside the body tag, I just want to use a background color. So this background color, instead of us to use this hex code right here, we can now make use of what is called the var. So inside the var, we add inside the parentheses of the var, we just add the default color. And when we save, our application is going to pick up that immediately because it's going to compile for us at the runtime. And also it's very, very nice because we are kind of making use of these CSS font variables, which is very cool. So right here, we do have a container. So the container is the container that is actually wrapping everything. The higher order div element that is wrapping everything, wrapping all our components. So I don't know how to put that in English. Pardon me for that. So we have to display everything in the grid, and then we can give it a grid auto rows. So the grid auto rows is used to specify the height of an element. So I just want to give it a 539 pixels. So just go ahead and give it according to your preferable size, but it did be nice if we are consistent on this tutorial. So I want to add a padding. So I'm just going to use rem unit. So I think one rem is 16 pixels. So using rem unit kind of make things consistent for you. You kind of know that you don't exceed that or below that. Then you can always know how you can split it whenever you want something like 1.5, 1.2, or just decimals of it. Then we can make reference to the onboarding. The onboarding and the timer are parent components. So I just want to add the margin of 0.5 frame, and also, so this means that top and bottom are going to have this margin. Then left and right are going to be centered. Then we have the border. So I'm just going to give it a border 2px solid, 2 pixels solid. We can now make use of our white color. So we can just make use of that white color that way. So we have a width. Each of them is going to have a width of 277 pixels. And then we have a box shadow. So I'm not actually good with box shadow for now. So I'm not going to explain that one, but I'm just going to add it so that you can grab it. So for now, let me just go ahead and add the padding. And then we have the border radius of 1 rem. And then we have a cursor of pointer. So apart from the box shadow, let me just go ahead and save this so that you kind of get an idea of what we are doing. So you can see right now we have a very nice border, that kind of shows us how responsive it's going to look like on mobile screen. So I just added that box shadow. So right now I can't explain that box shadow because I didn't get to read about it before I started this video. But right now, one thing that is missing is that inside this app, we do have the timer component, and inside that timer component, we don't actually have a class here. So I'm going to give this a class name of timer. So let's say you can see the box is going to be 2, and it's going to have same box shadow and also box color, border box of the one of onboarding. So let me just save that again. So right now you can see everything is kind of making sense, and also it's perfectly centered because we gave it a margin left and right of auto. Right now on larger screens, we kind of get something that looks very nice, but on a vertical order, and we don't just want that way. So in order to fix that, we have to make reference of large screens. So let's say large screen sizes that is greater than or equals to 768 pixels. So whenever it's greater than or equals to 768 pixels, we just want to make reference to that using the media screen. And so we have a minimum width of 768 pixels. Right now we can make reference our body tag, and then we give it a height of 100 view height, and then we have to display everything there, flex, justify everything to the center, and also align everything to the center. So I was not supposed to be making use of this auto recommendation. So let me just try and type things down. So we also give it an overflow hidden, and then we can reference the container. So for the container, we just want to remove all the padding. Then we give it a maximum width of 750 pixels. And then, so this is where the trick comes in, because right here you can see we do have a very nice vertical ordered containers. So if we want to actually split that into two, we have to put into consideration we actually added a grid here. So we are using the grid auto rows to actually give this a height. So if we want to make it display in a horizontal order, we have to use what is called the grid template columns. And then we have to repeat that div for each fragment. We just have to repeat it twice. So we are repeating, let's say we had like 4 divs. So we just want to repeat 4, and then every other thing can just be normal. So let's check the results. And right now you can see we have this nice looking mobile responsive view. And bringing it back to a screen size that is less than 768, we now get these vertically ordered components. So this is how we can actually use CSS to actually make things responsive. So if you wanted it to like look more responsive when it's less than this, you have to change this to like max. So this is not a CSS crash course. Of course, naturally, I don't know why, but I hate teaching about CSS because it's kind of typing a lot of codes and, you know, explaining a lot of things. And it's not always good to like do videos you don't explain things, because people actually need to learn. So guys, we are done with that, and let's go over to working on the styling for this onboarding screen. Let's go on to style the onboarding. So for the onboarding class, let me just say onboarding container. It's also a good practice if you can always comment your codes. Kind of very good as well. You can just go ahead and do it. So I want to display everything inside here as a flex, and I want to give it a flex direction of row. Since it's a single item, I want to justify that and also align it to center. So we can justify. So I feel tempted to use the auto recommendation, but for the sake of the tutorial, let me just be consistent on typing. So we also have to align items to the center. So when I save that, it's going to bring this text to the center right here. So let's just go ahead and style that text, which is the onboarding. So let me just copy that, see how lazy I am. Then we have the heading one. So right here, I can just make reference to the font family we just imported. So it kind of gives me a recommendation for font, but I'm not going to use that. I just want to use the one that we imported, and then if it's not available, we just want to fall back to sans serif. Then we have a text transform of uppercase. So guys, pardon me for using the auto recommendation. Then for the color itself, I want to use the white color by making use of the white variable that we defined earlier. Then we can change the font size to 3.5 rem. So this is like 16 times 3.5. And then we have to disable someone from selecting that text. So the user select will actually reference, kind of restrict somebody to actually select the text. So which is very nice for us. Then we can add a text shadow. So we have 2 pixels, 2 pixels. Then we give it the text shadow color. So let's save this, and it's gonna look very nice right here. So let's allow that to compile. So kind of will not allow us to select, but this like looks really nice. The next one we have to style now is the timer component. But before we get there, we have to go over to that component. There are some things we've not yet set up. So right here, we have to import some couple of components. So let me just comment that. Then we have to import the action.js, action from the same folder, I mean. So we have actions.js. So guys, don't mind me, I'm spoiled by the auto recommendation. So that's why I kind of find it difficult to do this. So we also have to bring in the progress file. That's a temptation. That's a temptation I'm trying to avoid. So inside this timer, then we can put in the actions. And at the top there, we also have to make sure we have the progress, because we have the progress bar before the actions. I'm going to save that, and inside here, we're going to give this a class name of PG container, which is the progress container. And also inside the actions, this is wrong for me. I just want that down. So we have actions here. I think I used the wrong shortcode to bring that in. So we have the class name called AC container. So it kind of, when you use nice class name, it kind of make things consistent to your component, so that you can always know how to target the CSS classes, or maybe you want to make an update in the future, you can pick it up. And inside this timer component, we can see the progress and also the actions. Let's go over to the CSS and give them some couple of styles. So the way I want to recognize that for now is to target them individually. So we have the PG container, and also we have the AC container. So I'm just going to give them a border, let's say 2px solid. I don't want to use white because I'm already using white there. Let me just use something else called yellow. So this will kind of give us a border for each of these components. Then right here, I want to style the timer container. So we can reference the timer, and I want to display grid. So grid is a very great, powerful tool you can actually use to position things, and you wouldn't even know that it can do that for you. So we also have to reference the grid template columns. I'm just going to use the spoiled version of me for now. So we just want to repeat that twice and then leave every other fragment. And then we have the grid template rows, which is going to, so the grid template rows here, you notice it's kind of different from grid auto rows. So this one is used to specify the, let's say, the limit for each of the elements to occupy. So if I want the elements all to occupy 20%, I'm just going to come here and put 20%, but I want them to be 50-50. So it's going to be 50-50. So when I save that, so if everything went perfectly, it should automatically be this way. But right now, I'm not working on the column aspect of it. I'm working on rows. So I want to change this to rows. So let me just save that, and it's going to place that perfectly for me. Inside this actions file, I'm going to quickly put down every necessary things that we need. So first we need the start and also the stop button, and also the set time button, I mean. So of course the start and stop button are together. We are going to use a ternary operator to fix that. So this one has a btn container. So we have the button. So we're going to have two buttons right here. We have the start, and we have the set time. So we're going to add one more button, but we're going to use a ternary operator like I said later on. So we have the start button and also the stop button. And beneath that, we are going to have a form. Actually, we don't actually need a form, but okay, let me just add this now for the design. Later on, we're going to fix that. So we have a type of text, and I'm going to give it a placeholder of enter time. And lastly, inside here, we're going to have the use timers. So I'm going to give this a class name of used. I think I should have made something like this, like use timers. but I gave it a class name of use containers, which I'm gonna just stick to use timers. Okay, let me just be consistent on my tutorial for now. Then we are gonna have a use timers here. So maybe later on we can just change some class names that we kind of make it looks a little bit understandable. So here we have the most used timers. Let me space this out properly, and beneath that we're gonna have a list of buttons. So we have list of buttons. So while I actually use the list here is because remember we sort based on the highest priority or the highest used. I gave this a button as well, and I'm just gonna give it a dummy minutes. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So depending on how many times you use. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And beneath this div, beneath the used container div, I think, or yeah, beneath the use timers div, we're gonna have another div with a class name, and I'm gonna call this one reset, and then we're gonna call this clear. So this is the clear button. So everything we just put down kind of looks really, really ugly. Let's go over to the CSS and style that up. Inside the styles here, let me just give this a comment of actions. We're gonna have the action container itself. So I want to reset the buttons of this action container to be something I really want. So let's just give this a background color of onset. And then we're gonna give it a border onset as well. So when we save that, it's gonna remove the borders and also the background color, which is the white background color of each buttons in the container elements. So let's just save that, and I think my PC is kind of lagging. So and let's make sure we have the right class name. So we have AC container. So that was supposed to work. So I was actually checking that. So you can see all the buttons right here. We kind of did a reset. And I just want to also remove the box shadow. So these are kind of some default styling that comes with a button, a HTML button. So I want to make the cursor to be pointer, and I want to give the font family of that to be the fonts we are using. So if you can recall, we are using a Rubik, and if we don't have that Rubik active, we just want to fall back to sans serif. Right now, let's go ahead and style these two buttons, the set button and also the start button. So we can just make reference to this button from the actions container. Then we have the button container. So we have to give it a margin bottom of 1.5 frame. So that's like, I think half of 16, 8 plus 16. Then we have to display it grid, because I wanted to make use of the full width. And then we can give it a grid, template, column. This time around I'm dealing with a column. I want to repeat that twice. And then beneath that, I want to give it a grid gap of 2 rem. So I think grid gap is obsolete. There are better ways to do things these days. But let's just go ahead and save, and you can see automatically our buttons, this button container kind of space things out, and we have nice button right there. Let's go ahead and style the buttons, the individual buttons, which is inside this button container. So I'm just going to reference the button container, and I'm going to target each of the buttons. So I'm going to give it a box shadow. Like I said, I'm not going to explain anything regarding box shadow now. Maybe later on in another tutorial I will, but I'm just going to add that. You can grab it, or we can just make use of the box shadow that we used before. we do have this box shadow. So it's just something similar. You can still make use of that. Then we have a padding of 0.6 rem for top, right, bottom, and left. Then we have a border radius of 0.5 frame, and then we have a color of so whenever I type white, it's gonna show me that color. I can select enter and it's gonna put in the var keyword for us. I'm gonna give this a font size of 1 rem, a font weight of 700, and then we have the text transform of uppercase, and lastly, okay, not lastly, this is second to the last. Then we're gonna give this a border of 2 pixels solid. So we have that white, and lastly, we can now give it a font family. So we're not gonna repeat typing that. I can just grab that and put that here. Let's save and see the effects. So right now we have these nice looking buttons. I'm gonna get rid of this border box or these classes there. We don't actually need that anymore. I want to add some interactive styling to these buttons. So for each of the button container button, whenever we hover on the buttons, I want to give it a border color. I think border color of this time around, I think we can use silver. The silver variable, then we can actually remove the box shadow. So if I go ahead and hover over this, so you can see we kind of get something that looks really nice there. And I want to actually delay that button a little bit, delay the transition. So I want it on the, or we can just target this button here. So we can say transition or 0.5 milliseconds is in out. So this is gonna like make it a little bit nicer, I think. So for the input form, inside the action.js, you can see here we have the form. So for this input form, I'm not gonna like spend time typing down the CSS as well as the use button. I'm just gonna grab the CSS and then I'll go ahead and explain that. So for the form itself, we give it a width of 100%, and I just aligned the form itself to the center, and then we kind of actually hit that. I don't know why, but let me just get rid of that display none and save. So right here, for the form itself, the input itself, we also give it a width of 100%, and we removed all the borders and also give it a very nice padding for the input itself. So then for the use container, which is exactly what we have here, the use container that kind of it's kind of wraps the use times or the use timers. So we just gave it a grid. So by giving it that grid, was like we kind of separated the button, the reset button, and also the used container itself. Then we went ahead to style the individual heading 1, which is the heading 2, which is this use timer right here. And also for the buttons, we kind of style the reset button right here. So you can see this is for the reset button. And then we have the use container on another list, so which is this, and we hit the scroll bar view because this is a scroll bar. This actually scrolls up and down. So we hit the scroll bar, and then for the reset, the reset was not supposed to be that way, but okay, it was supposed to be this way because as you can see here, we actually align this to a flex start. So if I remove this is gonna come this way, yeah. So by doing that, we make it possible for it to, sorry for that, to actually be on the top right. So the align item flex start pushes this up, then justify content flex and pushes it to the right. So a little correction we're gonna make here is to make sure that we change this to white, and also we change this as well to white, because while I was working on the application I used like something like white color, so that was just a little abbreviation. So right now you can see everything is perfectly. And now one more thing is the heading to itself for this one is also gonna be white. So this kind of makes it looks really nice. So right now let's go ahead and hide this form so that we can see a nicely placed timers. So that's it, and kind of shows us how to use CSS to style things. It's just for the fact that I'm not good at teaching CSS, but I hope to develop that ability soon. So we are done styling all the elements in our action components. So the next one now is to style the progress bar and make sure we have a very nice displayed progress bar. So guys, if you've really come this far, please do make sure you hit that like button so that YouTube can recommend these videos to many people out there that will be willing to watch this kind of video. So guys, the tutorial is kind of getting long and I don't really want it to be that long. I'm not gonna try to put everything down and style it, but let's just go ahead and work on the main functionality of this app. Then we're gonna use the time we now generate to work on the progress bar. I'm gonna come over to the timer. So this is gonna be where we're gonna configure most things. So at the top here, I'm gonna let's say right here, I have to import from React. And what I have to import here is the use state. I can also import the use memo or the memo object. So the memo object kind of returns the memoized version of our rendered application. So it kind of like, instead of us to have double rendered app, it kind of returns the initial one if it's exactly the same thing that is being rendered. So it kind of really helps to reduce memory usage. So the first thing I have to do is I'm gonna put something here called toggle form, set toggle form. Of course, if you're familiar with React hooks, this is how it works. So we have the set toggle form. So this set toggle form will be used to update this toggle form value. So we are gonna give it an initial state value of false. So what I can do is to come over to the CSS and go over to the form. What I wanna do here is I think at the bottom right here, I wanna get rid of the display none. So let the input itself be displayed. So I want that input displayed right there. And let me just close this. So I want this input to show, but I want to use this toggle form to actually switch it. So whenever I click on set time, it's going to toggle this form, either show or it's going to hide it. So let me just quickly go ahead and let's say toggle form. So let me create a function called onToggle. What this function does is to reset the toggle form, and it's going to take the toggle initial value, and then we have to set toggle form, or we can just do something like toggle initial value, and then we just want to say toggle is not equals to what it is currently is. So if it is true, it's going to be false. If it is false, it's going to be true. And I can just quickly pass that. So right here, I can just quickly pass that on toggle, and also trying to be more consistent here, I can just pass in the toggle form. And then inside this action, I'm gonna come to this form. I think it kind of makes more sense if I can change this to a div. So let me just, because this is not like a submit form, we are just only interested in the input. So let me just call this input form, and maybe later we can style it. But for now, what I want to do is to use the toggle form right here. So if it is true, we just want to return that, or else we just want to return null. So null kind of displays no value. Right here, we can also make sure we have the toggle form and as well on toggle. So actually right now it should be false because we don't actually have the value changed to true. So in order for us to use that, I have to come over to the set time right here. So I can say on click, and then I can put in the on toggle, which is going to bind it directly to this button. So when I click on this, you see automatically it toggles that button for us. Back inside this timer components, I'm gonna let me just call this one store the input minutes. So we're gonna call this time input. So this is gonna be the time that we type down inside the input folder. Sorry, inside the input box. So this is set input, and then we're gonna use initial state. I wanna make sure that the initial state of this is 1. So if you want to change it to 0, it's not bad, but for now I just want to set it to 1. And then what I can do is I want something that whenever we are typing, it's going to update this time input. So what this is going to do is to get time from the input and set time input. So I'm going to create a function here. Okay guys, let's stick to ESCs for now, although that this EX5 way of doing things. So which is going to take in the events. So whenever we are typing, it's going to update the time input. So let's call this handle change. So I want to get the input data, and which is going to be the e.target.value, and then I can set the time input to the input data. So I wanted that any value we are going to put there. So that form is actually a type of number. So this is not a type of text. So let's make it a type of number. I want it in such a way that whenever we are typing on this input, we just want to make sure anything returned here is going to be a number. I'm going to wrap this with the pass int. So this is just a global function from JavaScript that we can actually use to convert a string of number to a number value. And please make sure you spell things correctly. So I can just come down right here, and then I can pass in the handle change and also the time input. And then inside our action component, we just have to grab that. So let me just break this down. So we have the time inputs, and also we have the handle change. So the handle change goes directly to this inbox. So this is supposed to be a capital A. So for the unchange, we just have to put in the handle change. And then default value, we can actually use default value and set that to the time input. So it's kind of also consistent. Whenever we are changing anything here, it's going to set that to the default value of this time input. So let's allow that to save. So if I put 5, 45, 10, it's going to auto set that value back to the input box right here. So I can just go ahead and hide that. It's kind of making more sense now. The next thing I have to do is to work on the start and stop buttons. What I'm going to do is, okay, let me just correct this. Please make sure you correct this e.target. This is target, not taggy. I'm going to come up here. So I want it in such a way that whenever we start our timer, it's going to change this to stop. So let's call this toggle start and stop. So I'm going to call this countdown started, and also set countdown started. So I'm just going to give it an initial state value of false. So pardon me for that. And then you can clear this. So I'm gonna pass in the countdown started right here. So back inside our actions, what I can do is, it says I misspelled this, so this is false. So back here, I can just put in the countdown started. So for these buttons, I'm going to duplicate that and then change one of them to stop. So whenever, if it is false, so by default, the countdown started is going to be false. So whenever it's false, we want to display this one. But whenever it's true, instead of us to display null, we can now display the second one. So which is kind of really makes sense. So right now it's false. That's why we can display the stats. I'm going to create two functions right here. So we have the one to start the timer, and also we have the one to stop the timer. So we have start timer, which is a function, or probably we can use a direct function, but it's not still bad if we do this. And then we have the stop time as well. And then right here we have set countdown started to true, and then right here we just have to set the countdown timer to false. We can just scroll down to the action components, and then we can pass in the start timer and also the stop timer. So inside our components, we can now grab in the start timer and the stop timer. So right here, whenever we click on start timer, it's gonna call the start timer for us. The start timer function, and whenever we click on, so this is on click, whenever we click on stop timer, it's gonna call the stop timer for us. So let's say that and try to use it. So right now you could see after the application compiled, we're able to start and also we're able to stop. So it's kind of switching the buttons, which is kind of pretty cool for us. So in order to make sure that our input set time is actually working perfectly, let's kind of come here. So whenever we start that time, let me just give a small alert. So let's alert the time input. So I just want to make sure everything is working perfectly. So let's say I put in 5 and start. Okay, so right now we get 5. So whenever we start, we get 5. Okay, that was actually on stop, not on start, but it's not bad. It's showing us that it's working perfectly. So whenever we start a timer, I just want to make sure that the input box here should be hidden. So we can just close the form. So we just have to say if toggle form is active, we can just call the set toggle form back to false. Sorry for that. And we can just put in false value there. It's going to set it back to false. So we are going to create 2 more initial state values. So this one is going to be the one we're going to use for the computation. So this one is going to call the time in milliseconds. So let's say the time we set on this input box, we are going to convert that to a millisecond. So we have the time in milliseconds, and also for this array of, or this priority array of the most used timers, we are gonna have an initial state value of let's call it used timers. So for this one, we have a const of time in milliseconds. So we have use state. So by default, the time in milliseconds is going to be 0. And then for this one, we're going to call it used times. So always make sure you're consistent in using camel case. So we have set used times. So don't mind my voice, it's kind of pretty long. I did some recording, so it's kind of always trying to be frictioned. So right here we have to set the use state to an empty array for this particular one. I think are we spelling things correctly? Where are we getting that? Okay, it's working perfectly. Then I just want to copy that and paste this here, but in front of it I'm gonna add sets and then change that to an upper later. Inside this start timer function, we have to set the new timer in minutes, and also this is milliseconds as well. And also we have to add the time to use times. So for now, let me just go ahead and set the use times. So the use times is going to take in the previous times, and then we have to create an empty array and then spread the initial times. Or we can actually do this, since it's an array, we can just use times.concate, and then we can pass in the new time input, which is still going to work perfectly. So anyone you want to use, either you use spread operator or you concate it, which is not bad. So whenever we whenever we click on start timer, we want to convert that time to milliseconds. So the way we can do that is to set the time in milliseconds. We take the time input, we multiply it by, so we are dealing with a minute, which is 60, and then we have to multiply it by 1000. It's going to give us that time in milliseconds. So whenever we stop a timer, we have to reset this set times to milliseconds. So we also have to put in a 0 value. So reset it back to millisecond. Now we have the number that we put in milliseconds. Let's go ahead and calculate the time ahead. So we use get time ahead in milliseconds. And the way we can do that is to use the date object. But for now, let me just call this countdown time, which is going to be the new date. So whenever we use date object, it's going to return the epoch date from January 1970. And whenever we make use of the get time object inside of it, we get the current time in milliseconds. So the current time is from then till right now you are actually watching this video. And then we can add it together to the time in milliseconds, which is going to give us a time ahead. So this is time ahead in milliseconds. Then the way we do the countdown is to use the time ahead and take the difference between now and the time ahead, which is pretty cool, while we use our set interval. So before we still proceed, let me come down here. I want to pass in the use times and also the set used. Sorry for that, set use times. I think I didn't spell that correctly. This is set used times. Set use times. So we have set use times, and inside this function we have set used times, and right here we just have to add that to this clear button. So whenever we click on this clear, we're going to have a callback which is going to reference the set use times, so that it's going to reset that set use time. It's going to reset all the, or clear all the array of numbers inside here. So for now, we are not going to populate that. So this use times, used times, not use times. So whenever we click on this, it's going to clear the array of the times we've used. So down here, while we exported this we have to wrap this on memo, so which is kind of pretty cool. And inside this progress component, we can now pass in the important props that we need. So we have the time in milliseconds. We also have the stop timer, which we are going to use to stop the timer. We also have the countdown started, and also we have the countdown time. So why we can actually solve everything here is because while the set interval is running, it's going to try to re-render this current component, which is going to like always recalculate this without even putting into consideration we are actually on the same component. So that's why it's more safe if we pass it to another component that's going to handle that for us and then return the value for us if we want. Although we are going to create a custom hook, but let's still proceed. So this was supposed to be inside an object. So sorry for that, guys. So we have an object, and inside here, inside the progress components, let's go ahead and do everything firstly. So we have the time in milliseconds, the stop timer, the countdown started, and also the countdown time. So it's kind of pretty cool for us to do the calculations right here, but I'm going to create a folder inside the source folder called hooks. I'm going to create a file called use countdown. So this file is a custom hook that we're going to make use of. So we're going to export defaults. So I'm just going to call this use countdown. Which is a function. It's going to accept some couple of parameters or props. So for now, let me just return an empty array. So we just want to return, let's say, a const of seconds, a const of minutes, because right here we are dealing with seconds and minutes. So I just want to return the minutes and also the seconds. So right here, I just want to export default the use countdown. I'm going to come over to, let me close this action file. Inside this progress file, I'm just going to import. We can actually do this, guys. We can actually wrap this in an object. So I can have direct reference to the use countdown. So let me just make it a small letter. So right here, we can import from, we have the hooks folder and the use countdown. Right here, we can just directly have access to the use. That was supposed to work. So let's click on it. It's still not working. I think it's because I added a default here. So yeah, it's working perfectly. So right here, I'm gonna pass in, I'm gonna get the seconds and the minutes from the use countdown hook. So the use countdown itself is gonna accept some couple of props. So we have to pass in the time in milliseconds, the countdown started as well, and also the countdown time. So let's go over here. Let me just come here, grab everything here. So let me just copy that without wasting much of my time. And then right here, I will just paste that. So inside here, what I want to do is to, let me just put this down quickly and import the use states. Let me just import some things from React. So we're going to use the effect as well, and also the use states. So we want to actually use the countdown time and get the current time before we start counting down. So we kind of get something like a slight change in milliseconds, which is like 59. So if we are using like 1 minute, it's going to start from 59. or it's also going to get exactly that 1 minute, but it depends on how fast we want our interval to be. So we just want to get an instance of that time before we proceed counting down. So which is going to get which is going to use the new date and also the get time. So right here, I want to bring in countdown in milliseconds. Okay, I want to give this countdown. Sorry guys for that. So we have countdown in milliseconds. So anyone you want to do it, just go ahead and do it, or we can always update this countdown in milliseconds. So I call this set countdown. So the set countdown is what we're going to pass on our interval. So I'm going to make use of the effect here. So the use effect is going to have some couple of dependency. Let me break this down. So right here we have the countdown time. We have the time in milliseconds. We also have the countdown started. So this is where we're going to do a lot of work. So that's why it has to depend on these values, which we kind of monitor a change in these values. Now inside right here, I'm going to create an interval, but I'm going to use a let keyword, and I want to check if the time in milliseconds is greater than 0. So if it is greater than 0, we want to set that interval to set interval. And inside the set interval, we have the callback, and we want to run the interval on every 1 second. So which is going to now reset the countdown because it has automatically done the calculation for us. So we have to use the countdown time, which is the time ahead, minus the new date. So we also have to make sure it's on milliseconds. So that is get time. So that's it. And this is gonna frequently update this countdown in milliseconds. So as a React conventional way of doing things, whenever we like leave these components, we also want to, I think that should probably be here. Yeah, we want to use the component did on mount, something like that, and then we can clear that interval. So if you're a good React developer, you should always do this. Then else, if it is not greater than 0, or okay, let's do it this way. If the countdown started is false, so we have to check for the countdown started is false. We just want to reset everything back to 0, and also clear the interval. So we can clear the interval this way. So that's it for clearing the interval. Or we can also do something similar to, since we are watching for the countdown started value, we can also like clear, oh sorry for that, we can set the countdown back to 0 as well. Or you can actually use another use effect to do that. So if you're kind of like not feeling comfortable doing it here, you can use another use effect and just pass in this countdown as the watch, and then as the dependency, I mean, and then always update it, or always update the set countdown if this has reset back to 0, or if this has reset back to false. So instead of us to return this text of seconds and minutes, I'm going to create a function called get return values, which is going to take in the countdown. So we already have the countdown in milliseconds, and then right here I can still return those seconds and minutes. So the way this one works is we already have the countdown, which is the time difference in milliseconds, and that's been updated every single time. So we want to get the minute and second on every interval. And the way we can do that is to divide everything properly. So let me say calculate the time left. I'm going to call this one minutes. So the minutes is going to be, so it's going to be the countdown time. So remember that when we are dealing with a minute, we have to divide it by 60. But since we are also dealing with a millisecond, which is a large Moch number, we have to multiply it by 1,000. And then we want to floor it and get the nearest. We want to get, like, if it's a float, we want to get the highest integer, which is before the decimal. So we get the floor. So amount of floor is like, I don't know how to put this in English. Round it up to the nearest whole number. Yeah, that's a much better explanation for that. So this is gonna be running on every interval, and also for the seconds, we want to get the remainder of a minute by a second, and then we just get a remainder, but it's still gonna be on a decimal number. So what we can do is to divide this. It's still gonna be a larger Moch number as well. We can divide it by 1,000 to get the seconds of it, and that's that should be right here. So this kind of gives us like the remaining seconds of this of the minutes. This is minutes, and then it's gonna return something like a float. So we want to get the number before the float, so we can use the JavaScript to fix and get the first one. So to fix, I think there is a little bit explanation here. Number digits after the decimal point. So we just don't want any number after the decimal point. So we don't want something like 1.1, 1.2. And then this is gonna convert this to a string as well. So we just have to like pass it and make sure it's an integer. So let me go ahead and save, and it's gonna return that. So if we open our console right now and kind of check, we kind of get an error from where. Sorry guys, that's because we've not yet actually passed in the return value. So this is supposed to return get return values, and right here we pass in the countdown in milliseconds. Yeah, so let's save that and refresh. So everything is working perfectly. So right now there's nothing to display or to show us that our countdown timer is actually working perfectly. So the way we can do that is to come over to these progress components. I'm gonna console.log seconds and minutes. So let's save that and see what happens in our console. So we get 0 and 0. So let me just go ahead and click on start. So you see we kind of get the seconds and also the minutes. So if we had to come here and put this in like 6 and stop that and start, you could see we have 5 minutes, 58, 57. Everything is working perfectly right now. So let's just go ahead and use the times to now work on our progress bar. So I'm going to construct our own seconds and minutes. So let's call this customized times. So I'm going to call this custom or C minutes, which is going to take in the minutes. So if the minute is less than 10, we want to add 0 to that minute. Same also for a second, or else we just want to return that minute. So we have this as C seconds. So if the seconds, this is minutes. If the seconds is actually less than 10. We want to add 0 to that second as well, or else we return that seconds. So let's kind of display that in our application rather than using the console. So right here, I can just put in the curly braces. So I want to put in the C minutes and also the, can give it a space, C seconds. So this is SECE. So let's scroll up and allow that to refresh. So you kind of get the remaining time. So when we stop and start again, it's going to take that time and just display that there, which is very pretty cool. So this is not how our timer is going to look like, of course, but this kind of gives you an idea of what we are working on. So for here, I want to clear the interval whenever the minute or the time is less than 0. I mean, I want to reset the timer or stop the timer. Clear, or let's just say stop timer and reset. So I want to use the effect. Oh my God. I'm kind of making a lot of mistakes I don't want to make. So right here, I want the dependency to be on minutes and also on seconds. So it's kind of watching both of them. I want to compute both of them. So if both of them is less than 0, we just want to stop. So that means that our timer has elapsed. Plus seconds is if the addition of them is less than 0, we just want to call the stop timer. We just want to return. So did we pass the stop timer right here? Exactly. So whenever this comes to 0, it's going to like stop immediately without even trying to proceed. Before we proceed, we have to come over to this timer component and calculate the animation duration. So this timers actually works perfectly. Let's say we started a 1-minute timer. You can notice that in 1 minute, we have at least 30 seconds for our progress bar to rotate from here to here, and the remaining 30 seconds from here to here. So I'm going to get 30 seconds in milliseconds. So the way we can do that, okay, we don't actually want it in milliseconds, but we want to get 30 seconds. The way we can do that is to come here. I want to calculate animation duration. So I'm going to call this animation duration. This animation duration is going to take in the countdown time minus the new date. So remember, this is going to give us the difference in milliseconds. Dot get the time in milliseconds, which is the difference in milliseconds. And then I want to divide that by 1,000, which is going to reconvert that to a second. And then I want to divide it by 2, just the half of it. Then I can come here and pass in the animation duration. So this is what we're going to be using to calculate the time difference for the progress bars to rotate perfectly. So we have the animation duration. So let's go ahead and terminate our app, and we are going to install something called styled components. So this is called the styled component. So this is actually called styled components, not just components. So please make sure you spell it correctly. It's called styled components. Right now we have that done. I'm going to paste something here, but first I want to wrap this on a memo. So just go ahead and wrap that on a memo so that we kind of conserve memory. So in order for us to make use of the styled components, you just have to make sure we have it imported at the top. I'm going to import every dependency that we need. So from the styled components, I want to import the keyframes. and also the CSS, and lastly I want to import the style itself. So this style is the one that's going to create the style for us. So beneath here, we are going to create each style CSS that is going to, each style div, although it contains CSS inside the div. So the CSS we are going to provide is going to be inside the div. But before I proceed, I want to create an animation keyframe for the right and also the left sidebar. The left and right progress bar. So we use the keyframes we grabbed in, and then here I want that to rotate. I want it that on 100%, let it transform and rotate by 180 degree. So the same thing we did for the left, we are also gonna do that for the right. So this is DEG, and we can save that. Right now, let's go ahead and create our widgets. If you can recall, we did call this a progress container. I'm going to clear everything here. Of course, we no longer need that. And then whatever we are going to create here is going to go inside this PG container. First off, we're going to have a PG widget, which is going to take in the style, and then we need a div from that style, which is the styled component as well. And then inside here, however we want the div to be is exactly what we are going to provide here as the CSS property. We are going to have a height of 194 pixels and a width of 194 pixels. And we're going to have a border radius of 50%. And then we're going to give it a position of relative, and then a box shadow of we have this box shadow similar to the one we provided right here. Let's look for that quickly. So we can just grab any box shadow and come back here and paste that. It's not bad. So let's go ahead and make use of that PG widget right here. So if we bring in that PG widget and save that, you're going to see a very nice box right here after the refresh. So since I restarted the application, I didn't refresh, but after this, you can see we have this nice, really looking box right here. Of course, we are going to position that to the center when we are done. Or what I can simply do is to come over to the styles. Let me just quickly give this a progress container comment, and then here we have PG container. I just want it to look more nicer, so I want to disable any user selects, and give it a padding of 2 rem. Let me scroll up, and then give it a margin bottom of 2 rem as well. So I want to position everything to the center by using the flex, and then align all the items to the center and justify the content as well to the center. So let me save that, and that should bring this to the center. Yeah, so right now it's actually at the center, exactly the same way we want it. I want to close this use countdown and also the timer components. I also want to close. Okay, let's just leave the CSS in case it's gonna be necessary. So inside this PG widget, right now you can notice we have a very round, nice shape. Then we want another nice round shape that is gonna take almost the same width, but like a little bit of space between this and that. So I'm gonna call that PG, which is the progress widgets inner. So this is also gonna take in the styled, and we want to create a div. So right here we have position of absolute, and I want to give it a width of 172 pixels, 174 pixels. That's like 20% of the initial height and also initial width of the parent container. and then I want it to be positioned at the center, so I can use the transform. This is gonna make it to be positioned at the center, negative 50% and also negative 50%. And then we're gonna give it a border radius of 100%, so it doesn't affect the parent container. And then lastly, we can give it a background color. So remember, we do have a default color, so that's why I love, but for now, let me just give it a white. But I love styled component because it kind of also will make use of your CSS variables. If we come back here and just put PG widgets inner and save that, it's gonna actually display here shortly after this saves. So that's probably because I didn't put a translate here. So right now you can see automatically it places that to the center, which kind of really makes sense. So right now, if we still go ahead and add other things, they are gonna display maybe on top of this one. So let me just show you what I mean by that. So I'm just gonna change, before I will show you that, let me just change this back to the default color. And I just want to add a Z index of like 6 so that it stays at the top. So for the number to display, we actually have to display the number in the center. It's just similar to what we did at the top here, but without height and also without width. But just that we have a single div that wrap the text and also placed at the center. I'm gonna come up here. I'm gonna put in the PG number. So the PG number is gonna accept, of course, you know, we have the C minutes and also the C seconds, SECS. So let's save that, and I hope everything is spelled correctly. So right now you could see it's kind of looking really nice because it's placed at the center. So let's change this to white, and it's gonna take in a white color. So beneath here, I'm gonna add a circle. The circle is gonna contain the bars for the rotation, the bars that we're gonna use as rotations. So the first one is called the PG widget left. And the second one is called the PG widget right. So the way this works is very simple. So let me just go ahead and explain that to you. Right now, you know that we do have like two divs placed, one that displays this number and the one that covers just the 20% of the initial parent height and width, which is the PG inner. So let's say if I'm to get rid of this right now, so let me just go ahead and display this as none. And let's come down here and explain what this means. So this means that it's gonna take the height and width of the main container, which is 194 pixels. So that's exactly what you see here. So this height, they are just the same thing, like the height and width of that, which is 100%. So let me just go ahead and give this something like, I just want you to see this clearly, a background color of yellow. Now let me just save this. I don't want this displayed. Okay, we hid that. I don't want it displayed, and I don't want this also added to it. So let me save that. One of them doesn't have a background color, but you could see that. Let me just also do this for you so that you can also see that a background of color of, let's say, blue. And okay, let me save that as well. So what, both of them are there, and let me just remove this. Both of them are there with a position absolute, so they have the same Z index. So if I'm to bring this to the top, the yellow one is going to come up, so that should probably come up. Yes, exactly the same way we want it. So it's going to come up, and what we want to do is we want to display only half of this. So we use what is called the clip. The clip takes in an SVG rect. Now this is called the top, right, bottom, and left. So from the top, we want to display everything. From the right, we want to display up to 194 pixels. From the left, we want to also display up to 194 pixels. But from the right, we want to display only half of that. So when I uncomment this, it's going to display only half of what you see here. Now, we also have for this one, we also want to display just the same half. So it's going to be, both of them are going to be on the right side. And I want to rotate these to the right side. So the way I'm going to do that is to use a transform. I can rotate that to 180 degrees. So this one is going to be on the left and this one is going to be on the right. So let me just go ahead and save that. And right now you could see we have the left one and also the right one. So that's how we can do that. Then if we actually want this to now have that similar shape of a rounded thing, then we have to go up and remove this display none. With the help of the Z index, it's going to bring that to the front. And right now you can see we have that nice shape and also something that looks a little bit nicer. So right now let's go ahead and and rotate that. So what I'm going to do is to get rid of these background colors. I don't want all these background colors on it. So it's going to be like a normal shape, but we have like 4 or 5 containers different from each other, and then we have another container that's at the top, which is the first one, second one, third one, and the fourth one, which is the main container, with the fifth one, which is the circle that wraps the divided containers. So inside each of these containers, we're going to have the progress, and I'm going to create a PG widget progress left. And also let me add for the right without wasting much of our time. And then each of them is going to be a styled div. Styled.div. Then right here, we're going to have a position of absolute. So recall that we already have one of these at the right, but this one is the one at the left. So by default we are only displaying half of it, but on the left side. So we are just going to rotate it 180 to the right side. So I'm not going to waste time. Let me just quickly do this. So we have the height of 100%, as well as the width of 100%. And let's just give it a background color of white, and then a border radius of 100% as well. So let me just push this to the left. So let me just come here, and so inside each of these, let me add a progress left and also a progress right for this one. PG right, yeah, PG progress right. So that's like progress widget bar and also progress widget bar right. So you can see we have just a div, just that we have a slight different div. So now this particular div is actually 100% inside. So I want to display from here to here. That's from the right to the center. We don't want to display to the left side. So we're also going to make use of the clip. So we use the red. So from right, we want to display, from the top, we will display everything. So we have top right. So from the right, we wanna cut off the half. So we use the 97 pixels, and then we display every other thing. So this is gonna hide that. This is supposed to hide it. So we are not supposed to see the white background. So right now we have only half of it by the left. And then if I want to show that, we are gonna use animation. I can so this one is the left one. So we reference our animation because we want to rotate it 180 degree, and we can use 4 seconds linear both, so that it's gonna be smooth. Like it's gonna be smooth on its own. So when we save that, you could see it's gonna display just under 4 seconds and it's gonna rotate perfectly. So the same thing we did for this one is the same thing we're gonna do for the second one. So if you go ahead and copy this animation value and just change the keyframe to right, so both of them are gonna still rotate perfectly. So right now you could see it's rotate perfectly. So we do not want our animations to work except for the fact that we started a timer. That's why we want it to work. So the way we can fix that is to come up here. So let's come up here. I'm gonna pass some things to this props. So we have the animation duration in seconds, and also we have the time in milliseconds. So the time in milliseconds is not actually necessary, but I would always suggest that you always have something like a lookup before you start an animation, so that you don't kind of do things without controlling them. So we also have the time in milliseconds. Inside the animation prop for this one, all we simply have to do, let me just get rid of that and type down a fresh animation. We want to have access to the props. So we're going to have props.time in milliseconds is greater than 0. So we have, if it is greater than 0, we just want to return the CSS, and then we can now put down the left keyframe, and also the duration has to now do with the time we passed, which is the animation duration, and then we also give it a linear both, so that it's a consistent animation. So after that, we actually should have something like empty, because that have to do when it is not greater than 0, or whenever the animation has expired. We just want to stop. So I want to copy that and also paste that for here, except that I'm going to change this keyframe to right. And one more thing I have to do for this one is to use the animation delay. So the animation delay will delay the animation until one of the animations is completed. So we delay it half of the initial animation, which is also the time in milliseconds. So we can say props.time in milliseconds is also greater than 0. We want to use the CSS keyframe, sorry, the CSS keyword, and also here we just want to return empty case. Then right here, I want to use the props dot animation delay. I think, sorry, animation duration, not delay. So that solves it for both of them. So let me just expand this a little bit. So checking everything, and we have to make sure we use the right spelling. So we have the animation duration working perfectly, and also let's select. Okay, you see we are not kind of consistent there. So let me just scroll up and select for this one and copy that. So right here we can just replace that. So let's make sure everything is spelled correctly. So let's save that and try to format properly. And then in our application, we are getting animation duration is not defined. That's because, let me zoom this much more larger. So we have animation duration. I think the problem should be coming from the timer components. Let me just copy this and come here and paste that. So I'm using the wrong spelling. So let's go ahead and fix that and make sure it works perfectly. This is also animation duration. Okay. So let's save and check back. So it's kind of pointing on line 127. What are we getting wrong? It says animation duration is not defined. So sorry guys, that's because I didn't use props. That's props.animation duration. So let's start. Oh, we kind of get an error. It says animation duration is not defined again. Yeah, so that's our problem. So we also have props.animation duration. So that's probably it. So let's start and we're kind of not getting something properly here. So that's not working. So when I tried to check what the problem was, I realized we failed to put seconds. So this has to do with seconds. We don't just put the numbers without adding seconds in front of them because we are dealing with seconds. So this time around, after saving it and let's refresh and start the countdown timer, is going to work perfectly. So let's play that and you can see automatically it's going to work perfectly. So the next thing remaining right now is to make use of these most used timers. This is where data structures comes in this tutorial. I'm going to go over to the action. So inside these action components, so I'm going to make sure I bring in the use effect. So right here, right at the top here, I want to create an initial state value, which is an empty array. And then I'm going to call this one most used objects and also set most used objects. So we're going to have a function called reset. So this function is the one that is going to reset that. So let me just use exe syntax on reset. So there's an equal sign. So I didn't actually want this tutorial to get this long, but along the line is not a choice. So I have to explain things in a way that everyone can understand. So we have to set the most used objects to an empty array again, and then we also have to reset the set used times to an empty array. So when we click on this, it's going to reset that. So let me make sure I bring in the use state, and I'm going to come down right here. I want to comment all this out and leave one. So right here, I'm going to use the most used object and I'm going to map it. So we want to map that with the time, and then we're going to have to bring in the list inside of that. So we don't forget to add the key, which is the time itself, or I suggest that you do it this way. So just add the key. Just grab the key and add that. So inside here, we're going to have a button. So we're going to have a time of 0 and we can now add the word minutes to it. So the way we can keep track of the ones that, let's say, of any value or any number that we've used the most. Let's say we want to use 1. We stop and add again. So it's actually been added to our most used array object, but the way we can keep track of that is to count it. So I'm going to bring in the use effect. And inside this use effect, I'm going to create something called num_map. So this is a data structure type of object. Then we can make use of that use times. And then we can use the for each num_map. So we have used. So I think we didn't pass use time right here. So let me just put the use times. Let's come over to the time. And then, okay, we did pass it, but we didn't actually grab it from here. So we have the use times. So we have dot for each of the times in the use times. We wanna get the number, and then we can actually say if the number exists in our number map. If that particular number exists in our number map, we just want to increment that number with like the count. So which is very simple for us to do. So we can say the num_map, then we increment the count. So it's going to set a key value pairs with the number and also the counts. Else we just want to use the num_map, and then we just set that to 1. So if it is like empty, if it is the first one, we just have to like give it a one value. But if it is many, we just have to increment the number. And as well, this is gonna depend on these used numbers. So I'm just gonna add that as a dependency right here, times. So we have to pass the use times as a dependency over there. So right now we're gonna just have like an object. So if you notice right here, we are using something called most used object. So we have to convert this object to an array, and we have to also make sure it's sorted. So I'm gonna bring in let's say sorted object to array, or sorted array from objects. So that will kind of make sense. Sorted array from objects. So right here, I'm gonna create a sorted array. I'm just gonna give it a let keyword, and then for each of those number in the num_map, what I can do is to push them into this array. Then we sort that. So this is gonna be array.push. We can actually push the num this way. Then I want to bring in also, okay, let's push this to an array because I want to bring in the count as well. So why I did this is because I don't want to just have single array values. I want to have access to each of these numbers individually. So we can bring in the count. So if you cannot push in directly to this, it's going to sort it, but let's say it's going to use just the numbers to sort it. It's not going to sort it based on the priority. So that's why I added something to kind of make it different. Then I can take in the array and then sort that. So the array is just similar to the reduce function. So we have the initial value, so give that A, and the next value, give it B. So right here, we can actually use a return. And what I want to do is I want to compare the two values and get a difference. So if A1, remember that we have an array right here. If A1 minus this is true, then it's going to sort that like in an ascending order. So that's how we can do it. We can actually get rid of this, and just return, wrap everything there on a parenthesis. So I'll just format that properly. And then lastly, what I can do is to set the most used object to the sorted object. And even if we go ahead and put that, it's still gonna be like take for example, it's still gonna be from an ascending order. So we have to reverse the number because we have the highest one at the end. So we have to reverse that. So make sure you come here and add a reverse keyword. So anyway you want to do it, if you want to add it here, it's not too bad. So if we start with 1, so these are kind of the times I use to test this out. So 1 is the highest, and let's say I move over to 5. So automatically you see 5 comes at the top. So let's say I put down 6. So you see 1 is above 6, and right now 6 is above 5. So if I still go ahead and change that to 5, so 5 should be above 6. So 6 is above 1, so which is kind of making more sense. So that's how we can actually sort things with JavaScript. So guys, we've come to the end of this tutorial and our application is working perfectly the way we want it. One more thing we forgot to do was the fact that regarding the increment of the screen size or the media screen size, we forgot to actually add something called grid gap. So let me just go over to the CSS quickly and fix that. Inside this inside the media query, we did put at the top, I think. Right here, we just want to add a grid gap of 2 rem. So most of these are obsolete, but it still works perfectly. So let's save that, and you can see we have that nice space. So guys, we've come to the end of this tutorial. Do not forget to hit that like button. On our next video, we're going to create more interesting things. So thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.